If we are ready, we are going to introduce our next session with Dr. Nehal Parikh. I know I said it wrong, sorry. He's a board-certified physician in pediatrics and neonatology and a brilliant clinical researcher at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. In this session, we are going to review the physical and mental benefits of raising children on a plant-based diet. Please let's welcome him to the stage and hear all of this great research and information.
All right. Well, it's really great to be back in Houston. I was here for about 9 years working at Children's Memorial Hermann and the Texas Medical Center, and back here together with our friends, dear friends, Munish and Bandana Chawla. And it's so amazing to see the work that they've been doing with this foundation and especially this conference for the last 6+ years. I'm excited to talk to you about this topic of raising healthy plant-based kids. As Danielle mentioned, I've raised with my lovely wife. She's here somewhere. She moved, Nina, there she is, 2 healthy kids who are now 18 and 22. And I just take a lot of pride in sharing this information I've learned over the years with patients, or parents, I should say, of my patients who invariably have benefited from this. I have no conflicts to disclose except for funding from National Institutes of Health. So today we'll get into plant-based diets and what they are and what they're not. There are various flavors of plant-based diets, as this audience likely knows, but I will discuss them in light of things such as processed foods. We'll challenge a few myths about plant-based diets. We've heard some of that already with Dr. Neil Bernard and Victoria Moran. We'll get into nutritional recommendations for the early critical years. How many folks in here have children below the age of 18? All right, that's great to see, quite a few. And how many grandparents with young? Oh, awesome, awesome. And I hope the rest are planning to have kids in the future, because God knows we need plant-based folks to have more children. And of course, not to disparage those that are still on that journey and trying to decide what is best for themselves and for their children. Hope to get into that a little bit today as well. And then just briefly, we'll talk about micronutrient requirements, because we hear so much about how vegan kids or plant-based kids are deficient in vitamins and nutrients. And nothing could be further from the truth if you plan the diet properly. So a little bit about myself. You heard just a brief amount about my 2 plant-based kids who are pictured here, Maya and Milan. They're now 18 and 22, and my wife here in the middle. I was born vegetarian, moved to the States as an early teen, and began to assimilate into the culture and started eating meat. And then I met my vegetarian wife about 10 years later and returned to my plant-based roots. And then Nina learned about modern dairy practices a few years after we were married, and unfortunate violence and pain that cows and their calves have to suffer in order to give us their dairy and dairy products. And the same is true for chicken and their babies. And so, of course, we were ethical vegetarians and realized that we weren't fully being ethical, so we gave up dairy and eggs immediately. And a few years later, came across the China study, T. Colin Campbell's China study, and followed him to his talk at the Vegetarian Summerfest in 2011. And it only took us a few years to convert to a whole food plant-based diet. And in some sense, we're still on that journey, falling off that wagon from time to time when it comes to processed foods. But by and large, we've been practicing that way, and so have our kids for the past 10 years. And as Danielle mentioned, I routinely advocate whole food plant-based diet for my high-risk patients' parents. I take care of babies in the ICU, sometimes for months at a time, and we develop these relationships in the NICU. And I'm also a neuroscientist, and families that have kids with brain injury, for example, have a long-term high risk, up to 40% risk of things like cerebral palsy, mental retardation, ADHD, autism. And I also advocate for this way of eating when parents want more than traditional medical advice. So a little bit about the different types of plant-based diets. Harvard says that plant-based or plant-forward eating are patterns that include plants, but that doesn't mean that doesn't mean that it's exclusively plants. And of course, some people will define it this way, and it's a journey. So if you start off this way by crowding out your plate with more plants and fruits and vegetables, that's perfectly a great place to start. A vegetarian diet, of course, is exclusively plants other than dairy and eggs. A vegan diet excludes all animal products, dairy, eggs, honey included. And then you heard a little bit about the vegetarian diet from Dr. Bernard. And of course, the foundation of this is plant-based. People do forget, and that's part of the reason why so many studies have shown a benefit of Mediterranean diet over the standard American diet, which probably is the worst diet of any culture. The American Heart Association goes on to add that for a Mediterranean diet, it's important to limit added sugars, sugary beverages, sodium, highly processed foods, refined carbohydrates, saturated fats, and fatty or processed meats. While the Mediterranean diet does allow for some meats, they generally do say very little meat. And the one thing about it that's quite different is the extra virgin olive oil, which they advocate in moderate quantities. The American Heart Association also goes on to say that a plant-based vegetarian or vegan diet can help you lower your risk of heart disease and obesity. So this is now in the medical mainstream. It took a long time. And of course, we physicians receive very little nutrition knowledge in medical school. It is thanks to conferences like this. My wife and I have been going to the Vegetarian Summerfest conference for over 10 years, and this is something that I also advocate for folks that can make it out to the Pittsburgh area, the Johnstown area. It's a wonderful conference where I've heard people like Nehal Parikh and Michael Greger for years, and this is where my education came from, in addition to the independent research that I've done to learn more about whole food plant-based diet. But that really is what I've concluded throughout the years, almost 2 decades of learning, is that this is absolutely the best way, not just for us as adults, but for our children as well. From day one, they should be on a whole food plant-based diet. And T. Colin Campbell's Center for Nutrition Studies defines it as eat whole, unprocessed foods derived from plants. So simple. And whole means foods that are minimally processed. And if you're not sure if a food is minimally processed, an easy way to remember that is generally any food that you can readily make in your kitchen. And if you can't, then it's probably best to avoid those things like oils, white flour, sugar, and salt. And again, it's a journey. You don't have to get there right away. So let's get into a few myths about plant-based diets. How many of you have heard that plant-based diets are not safe for kids? Yeah, quite a few of you. And in the news, you'll oftentimes hear these horror stories of some parents killing their toddler or their infant because they were on a vegan diet. And of course, sometimes it's because of a poorly planned diet, but oftentimes there are other reasons why that child died. But it is important to remember that these diets have to be properly planned, in that they overall do have sufficient micronutrients such as calcium, vitamin D, and B12, but only if you're paying attention to the foods that you're giving. They should be fortified, or you should provide supplements for your child. And of course, plant-based diets have more fruits and vegetables and are associated with many benefits that you cannot get from animal foods, such as phytochemicals, antioxidants, and the like. And of course, they're lower in total and saturated fats. Total fat is not a bad thing for children, but saturated fats absolutely is, and I'll get into that a little bit more. And of course, it lowers your risk of overweight and obesity. And overall, it is absolutely a higher quality diet than anything out there. Myth number 2, I think most of you have heard this as well. Where do you get your protein? And of course, for growing kids, it's important that they get their protein, but not necessarily so important that we also consume all sorts of other chemicals that are harmful for us and our kids. So as long as you work on a versatile diet where, of course, there are many, many different plant proteins. You've heard about these today as well. Legumes such as beans, lentils, peas, peanuts, soy products, whole grains, nuts and seeds all have healthy amounts of proteins, not to mention even your greens have proteins. One thing to remember is that plant proteins have slightly lower digestibility, so dietitians generally say taking about 10 to 15% more protein because of the absorption. But the amount, the required daily amount is still fairly low, 1 gram or roughly between 0.9 and 1.2 grams per kilo per day. But most of us get much more than that, even children. In this one German study, and this is true in America as well, the Vichy German study of 430 1 to 3-year-olds, they compared omnivores with vegetarians versus vegans. And as you can see here, the amount of protein they all got was comparable, and it was well above the required daily allowance. So delivering protein to kids is not a problem at all. Again, it just needs to be a thoughtful, well-planned diet. Myth number 3, to build strong bones, you must consume dairy. I won't even ask you if you've heard this because we've all heard this. And of course, many foods can build strong bones and protect you from disease. And calcium is, of course, not the only thing that you need for strong bones. You need vitamin D, you need protein. And calcium is found in many, many food sources, especially the dark green leafy vegetables, kale, broccoli, bok choy, and tofu and fortified soy milk are also wonderful supplemented choices for getting calcium. And as long as you're paying attention to whether or not foods are fortified, if you're not giving your kids enough dark leafy greens, then just give them supplements. That's another way of getting around that. And nutrition is not the only way to give strong bones. Weight-bearing activities such as yoga, running, brisk walking, and for older kids, strength training is another way to build strong bones. And one last myth, you heard about this morning already, eating soy increases the risk of breast cancer. And again, nothing could be further from the truth. If anything, even kids have been studied long-term when they start with soy milk, either as a formula or as soy milk or other soy products. These kids actually have a lower lifetime risk of breast cancer. And you already heard about some of the mechanisms, isoflavones. So soy has these phytoestrogens that mimic estrogen, but actually it has not only a pro-estrogenic but an anti-estrogenic effect that is likely why it's protective. And this has been studied with long-term development with children, and of course there is no harm long-term, including with their brain and neurodevelopment. And in fact, the Harvard School of Public Health tells us that a diet that is rich in soy actually has either a neutral effect or a beneficial effect. There are no credible studies that have shown any kind of harm with soy-based products. So a little bit about the importance of the early years. I think what we're seeing in America is really telling us even more about the importance of nutrition in our lives. Of course, childhood is a critical period during which lifelong eating habits are established. And this is, of course, influencing the risk of chronic diseases. A large dietary survey of over 30,000 children in the United States showed that more than half of our youth have a poor quality diet, and that more than 70% of the calories are coming from highly processed foods. And amazingly, only 1 out of 400 of these children would be considered to have an ideal quality diet. That's really woeful, and I think most of us are in this room because we recognize this and are trying to change that. More than 50% of American children now are either overweight or obese. 1 in 10 have borderline high or high blood pressure, and 1 in 5 have abnormal cholesterol or lipid concentration. So these are all the hallmarks of long-term cardiovascular disease that we need to start with good nutrition from the outset. But unfortunately, what are my colleagues doing? They're, rather than prescribing a healthy diet or good exercise or just getting kids off the couch and video games, they're favoring medical treatment because that's what the medical industrial complex wants to do. They just want to put you on the conveyor belt of American medicine. And so lipid-lowering drugs and blood pressure-lowering drugs are just masking the problem. They're not really treating what's ailing our children. So let's get into a little bit about some foundational principles and getting to specific recommendations for what our kids need. And of course, kids are not little adults, or sorry, I should say children are not, small adults. They have higher needs in calories, in protein, in fat, vitamins, and minerals. And plant-based diets are naturally less energy dense. In one study, adults got about 650 kilocalories less on a plant-based diet as opposed to a standard American diet. So if that's your goal, is to lose weight, that's a great diet. But for kids, of course, they need to gain weight. They need to get more protein and more fat, much more proportionally than we do as adults. So this has to be kept in mind because the goal is for optimal growth and development, especially brain development, and also prevention of chronic disease. The second piece, I think many American parents tend to forget that. So for the first 6 months, the gold standard is human milk, of course. Babies need nothing more than their mom's milk, and it really is the perfect food. We call it a medicine for babies, especially in the ICU, and we try really hard for moms to provide their milk. Breastfed babies, for example, on average have a 7-point IQ advantage over formula-fed babies. And this is something I'm amazed how many moms don't know this. And of course, formula companies are always trying to mimic what is in breast milk, which we still don't have a clue as to. There are thousands of compounds, just like in fruits and vegetables. We don't know how they're helping, but we know that they help babies. And in my ICU and many other ICUs, we've largely replaced infant formulas, cow's milk-based formula, with either mom's milk or with donor milk. There are now donor milk banks out there that basically function when moms are unable to express their milk and give it to their sick baby or choose not to. And it has helped many, many babies because most of these premature babies, for example, do not tolerate formula. And of course, breast milk, when compared to cow's milk formula, has been shown to reduce the risk of allergies, anemia, sudden infant death syndrome, colic, infections, diabetes, cancers, and the list goes on. And it's important to remember that most of these kids do need vitamin D supplementation, and some, if their moms were low in B12 intake or their status is confirmed low, then they should be on B12 supplement as well. More on that in a little bit. For the next 6 months, between 6 and 12 months, it's important to start solid foods, things like infant cereals, vegetables, fruits, and protein-rich foods. And of course, moms should continue their breast milk into years 1 and 2, if at all possible. When it's not possible or mom chooses not to, she's going back to work and is unable to pump, fortified soy milk formulas are just as good, but I would say even better than cow's milk-based formulas. They have the same level of calcium, vitamin D, and B12 supplementation as any routine cow's milk formulas. And they alleviate all the problems that are associated with cow's milk, such as feeding intolerance, colic, and the list goes on. In fact, studies, more than one study, I've only listed one here, shows that soy milk formulas tend to alleviate the symptoms of intolerance that many babies have from cow's milk formula. And as I mentioned earlier, soy is not associated with any adverse effects long term. And in fact, we know that cow's milk formulas cause lactose intolerance, milk protein allergy in up to 5–10% of newborns, and also a condition called necrotizing enterocolitis. If you've heard about this, then you probably had a preemie in your family. And this is a condition that primarily afflicts preterm babies. It is like a milk protein allergy, but worse in that babies can lose their gut or even die from this. So that's one of the reasons we primarily use donor milk when moms cannot provide their own milk. And of course, cow's milk formulas are also associated with things like colic, allergies, infections, anemia, and diabetes, all the things that breast milk protects against. So between years 1 and 3, it's important to remember that these kids still need a lot of protein and fat. In fact, there's a reason breast milk is still fatty at this age. Half of the calories are coming from fat. And so a poorly planned diet can be too high in bulk and too low in calories. We want parents to be eating the same way that the kids do, in that it should be plant-based, but the adults who probably need to lose weight or at least maintain a proper weight should be eating lots of fiber-rich foods. But children, if you give them too much fiber, you may be replacing fiber with, or replacing fat and protein with fiber. So something to keep in mind. And lack of calories is a main reason why so many of these diets fail in children. So some good high-fat foods for toddlers include tofu, smooth nut butters, creams, mashed avocado, soy yogurt, puddings, and soups that are fortified with soy milk. And moderate amounts of olive oil, canola oil, and especially omega-3 rich flaxseed oils are probably an important source of fat also if you cannot get it from other sources. For kids that are age 4 and above, the needs for fat and proteins start to slowly decrease over time, but they still, again, need a good, healthy amount. So fortified soy milk offers some nutrients, the same nutrients as dairy milk, but without the fat and cholesterol. So if you choose to continue milk for your child, which of course is not essential for older kids. Again, we're the only species that continues milk for our kids beyond the first couple of years of life. But if you choose to continue it, soy milk is a great option. Juices and processed foods, I would say, are harmful, and of course, there are degrees of harmful. So the ideal is, again, to try and stick with minimally processed foods. And of course, introducing a wider variety of plant-based foods, such as beans, legumes, and a rainbow of fruits and vegetables. I think you already learned about one of the wonderful antioxidants that these colors offer, but there are others, lycopene, lutein, beta-carotenes. These are all antioxidants and phytochemicals. There are thousands of them in fruits and vegetables, and we don't even understand how they benefit us, but they do. And of course, you get none of these from animals. So for diets where you're not sure if you're providing your child with fortified foods, it's important to supplement them with vitamin B12 especially. I think most of us that are vegan or vegetarian understand this, and it's the same for children. Children, if they're getting it from the foods, it's fine, but otherwise supplement them with 2 micrograms per day of vitamin B12. And vitamin D, either 15 minutes of sunshine or 5 micrograms per day of vitamin D. And calcium, generally, you shouldn't need a supplement as long as they're eating enough green leafy vegetables. Just briefly, a little bit more about micronutrients. I've mentioned a lot about vitamin B12, but in general, most studies have shown that vegans, not only on B12 and D, can sometimes, if it's a junk food vegan diet, you're going to get less of the green leafy vegetables. And so calcium, iodine, zinc can be low, and so you have to find reliable sources or get supplementation. Sometimes you'll have to check blood levels. For my kids, and we do sometimes check B12 and vitamin D levels, but generally, if you're good about at least providing those supplements, you will not have deficient children. Vegans generally have the highest intakes for vitamin C, vitamin K, and vitamin E. And folate, iron, potassium, magnesium, and copper are also rich in these foods, so that is never a concern as far as intake. And overall, I think I'm speaking to the choir here. There are multiple studies that have documented this, and we know this, that vegetarian and plant-based diets, especially a whole food plant-based diet, is the highest quality diet in terms of fiber. in terms of phytonutrients, fruits, vegetables, and it's the lowest in fats and saturated fats, and of course added sugars. So what are some key messages to take home with you? Again, I may be speaking to the choir, but for those that are still on that journey, I would say work towards a whole food plant-based diet. That is the ideal diet for not only you, but for your child. And of course, it's not going to be an overnight change. And so you can start by gradually phasing out processed foods and meats by putting more vegetables on your child's plate, putting more whole grains, more legumes. And it's important to eat this way yourself as well, so your child learns from that. It's really about modeling. If you don't do it, it's unlikely that it will be successful for your child. Choose soy milk over cow's milk formulas. Use minimally refined foods. Work towards eliminating all animal products. As Dr. Bernard said, these may be the most processed foods. And a well-planned whole food plant-based diet is safe, absolutely, and provides excellent nutritional value. And really the way to stick with it, I would say please commit to it today if you're not already on it. You may be on a junk food vegan diet like my wife and I were for about 3 years or so. And it's very tasty, of course. But if you want to get to ideal health, get to a whole food plant-based diet. And the way to stick with it is to really educate yourself, coming to conferences like this, doing your own research, and really saying this is important to me, and if not for yourself, do it selflessly for your child. And no doubt you will start seeing the benefits, and you will want to continue with this way of eating. I will stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there's time. Is there time?